the whole mobilisation operation that Putin authorised a few days ago has backfired and is continuing to backfire on him in a spectacular fashion.
I'm trying to invite you into our daily briefing room where we can speak to leading tactical and strategic minds about the latest situation in the war in Ukraine. So let me welcome the former Chief of the General Staff, General Lord Dannatt. Richard, good afternoon to you.
John, good afternoon to you as well.
Good to have you here. I'm also being joined by Dr. Domitilla Sagramoso, who's an expert in conflict security and Russian development at King's College London. Domitilla, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you too, John.
Good of you to join us. Richard, can I come to you first then? We're talking quite a lot on the programme today about the annexation of those regions of Ukraine. It's to be signed by Vladimir Putin. We can take it, I think, as read that these so-called referenda leading to this annexation have precious little credibility to them. But nonetheless, it's gonna happen. We know then that is the politics, if you like, behind all this. As a soldier, how would this affect your thinking of the military picture?
Well, to be honest, John, I don't think really these referenda, because they are obviously to westernize such a sham, that they in fact change very much. Now, they might from Vladimir Putin's rhetoric point of view, but as far as events on the ground are concerned, the four areas under consideration, like the whole of the Donbass region and indeed Crimea, are going back to the 1990s when the Soviet Union was broken up. They are part of sovereign Ukrainian territory. And
yes,
as President Zelensky has said many times over the last few months, and increasingly echoed by many people in the West, that this is sovereign Ukrainian territory and they will fight to free it of Russian occupation.
Yes.
And I think the West must continue to support Ukraine in that objective.
And clearly the forces of Ukraine will carry on uninterrupted in their effort to liberate their territory. But of course, I mean, you can scarcely call Russia a country or a country led by a leader who cares much for the rule of law. But it is a question of fact under Russian law that once we're discussing Russian territory, it is possible to move conscripts into the area to fight.
Yes, I mean, that gives him, well, you've just raised a very important wider issue, moving conscripts into the area to fight. I mean, I think the whole mobilization operation that Putin authorized a few days ago has backfired and is continuing to backfire on him in a spectacular fashion. Hitherto, the war that's gone on in Ukraine, as far as most Russians are concerned, has been somebody else's business, somebody else's problem. But now mass mobilization, which effectively is what it is, has been ordered. This is becoming everybody's problem. And the reaction we've seen on all our television screens is huge queues people trying to get out of Russia. And this is a real referendum, if you like, on popular feeling about Putin's war.
Yes.
So come back to the issue of these four areas that he is now claiming are Russian territory. Yes, he can move conscripts in if he wants to. I'm not sure that'll make much difference, apart from an awful lot more Russians will get killed. But he can talk about defending those areas under the wider nuclear umbrella and repeating his nuclear threat. Well, we've all been living under that nuclear threat since the 24th of February. And one has to keep it very much in mind, but then balance up, is he really going to use a nuclear weapon? Is he any more likely to use a nuclear weapon to defend, or just because he's got these four additional areas than the previous set of circumstances?
Yes, yes.
He has to weigh up what the West's reaction will be. It could be a nuclear reaction, or it could be a very severe conventional reaction using weapons of greater force than we've hitherto seen on the battlefield.
Yes.
And he needs to weigh that up as well.
Domitilla, in one sense, the conversation is sterile, but it's a conversation that none of us can resist. We cannot read deep into Vladimir Putin's mind, but you know Russia. You watched Vladimir Putin over a period of years. On the question, would he resort to weapons of mass destruction, maybe including nuclear weapons, in defense of territory which he now deems and declares to be Russia? What are your thoughts?
Well, as you rightly said, I don't really have an access to his mind. I just can make a guess that I think that what he does very well is to threaten the use of nuclear weapons. He can do that very easily by just pronouncing a sentence, and that creates a lot of concern and panic. among members of the public in the West, and it really focuses the minds of decision makers in the West as to how to address the Ukrainian problem. I'm of the view also that I don't think that Putin is going to use nuclear weapons even at a sort of tactical level, because he knows perfectly well that can result in a retaliation and his eventual death and that of many of his citizens. So I think that he knows that, but he's very good at creating the specter and the use of these weapons. So he's sort of deterring some of our actions because he already knows perfectly well that, he's not doing very well on the ground militarily, and therefore he uses these instruments to sort of freeze our momentum, our support to Ukraine. And I know that there's this narrative among many Western quarters, we're almost worried when Ukraine does too well. And what happens if Putin is cornered? Is he going to use a nuclear weapon? And I think he's really playing very, very effectively on that.
Indeed. Now, tell me, Domitilla, how will the annexation of these Ukrainian areas, how will that be seen and felt in Russia? At the beginning of this conflict, the presumption, I think, was that there was a good deal of support among Russians for the laying claim to Ukraine, claiming it was a part of Russia and what Russia was doing. They were happy to, at least in very large number, to support it. Now the war has been going on for as long as it has, going very badly for Russia. There are protests, there are some riots. People are fleeing Russia to avoid the draft. Has that opinion shifted? And this annexation, how do you think it will now be seen among ordinary Russians?
Well, you're absolutely right when you said, for many Russians, some of these areas are really considered part of Russia. That's part of the narrative that Putin has promoted in the last years, that all these areas are actually, that Ukraine is an artificial country and that these areas have belonged to Russia. So historically, and has convinced many, even some in the West. And so I'm sure that people from an emotional level, they're going to feel that this is sort of the right return of these lands to the Russian state, and maybe justifies in a way all the casualties that they have suffered so far. But I think they're also very much aware that the war is not going in the right direction. So I think there's not going to be the euphoria that there was with the annexation of Crimea, because part of the euphoria was the way in which it was carried out without sort of almost shooting a single, firing a single shot. So that was sort of added to the mystique of Putin and his ability as a sort of a strategic or a tactician. And I think now, it's completely the reverse. I mean, these territories, were annexed as a result of very heavy costs in terms of casualties, in terms of equipment of the armed forces, high levels of attrition. So the excitement, I think, is going to be a lot more reduced. And there is also a lot of concern in Russia about the escalation to nuclear levels. I mean, there was a report in a newspaper which generally is not very critical of the Kremlin, expressing serious concerns about escalation and, the use of nuclear weapons, and the discussions of the use of nuclear weapons with sort of lightness. So I think that in the back of the mind of Russian people today, there are concerns about being mobilized, about being sent to the front, about losing members in the families, about, the economic costs as well, because at the time of Crimea, initially, the sanctions were, they were not so strong and they only were introduced very partially. Now they have been suffering from economic downturn. There is a lot of anxiety. So I think that there isn't going to be the euphoria that used to be with Crimea, but Putin is going to utilize this as an indication that his policies are in some way successful. Okay. But my final point is that in a way, Putin's actions are very sort of chaotic in many ways, and they're not really following a clear strategic line.
All right. Good to talk to you and get your thoughts. Dr. Domitilla Sagramoso from King's College London and former Chief of the General Staff, Lord Dannatt. Really good to have you on the programme.